I think we've got a good contingent here, so I think we will dive in. So again, thank you so much for joining us for our very first AMA session here on Quorum's webinars. My name is Teresa Hebert, and I am the Director of Communications here at Quorum. A couple of housekeeping items before we dive in. This session is being recorded and will be shared out to all of our registrants. So if you have to jump off early or you just heard like the best answer that you want to share with your colleagues, that will be sent in the next day or so after the end of our session. Again, a structure here, we're not really going to have any kind of agenda. You all are driving what you'd like to know. We've got a couple questions to get us started, but would like to see you all active in the chat. With that in mind, I want to give a quick plug to any Quorum customers who are on the line about Wonk Nation. So Wonk Nation is Quorum's customer community via Slack, where you can communicate with other Quorum customers about how they're using the platform, best practices in the industry, upcoming events, really any kind of engagement you like to do with other folks who are your peers in public affairs. And why are we talking about this today is because in the Wonk Nation community, folks had the first chance to submit their questions to get to the front of the line here for our AMA. So if you enjoy today's session and you want to make sure that your questions get answered early or often in future sessions, feel free to give that a scan to join. You can also grab this QR code in the docs section of the tab here to learn more and get your questions there. With that, I want to introduce our speaker today, Brian Rubenstein. Brian has been on a couple of Quorum webinars, is on blogs with us, so we're really excited that he is here as we test out this new style of webinar. So a little bit about Brian. He led digital communication strategy for the advocacy affiliate of the American Cancer Society for more than 15 years. He's been recognized as an expert in developing and executing award-winning programs that leverage extensive platforms, including email, social media, SMS, and web. He also served for 4 years as an advocacy field consultant for the Society, helping guide legislative campaigns and grassroots initiatives in 10 southeastern states. Prior to these roles, Brian helped lead the public affairs program for Atlanta's largest independent public relations agency. His work included creating and executing media and outreach programs for Fortune 500 companies and nonprofit organizations. He managed the agency's qualitative and quantitative research practice, leading focus groups and polling activity for clients. So Brian's got a wealth of knowledge really across the advocacy spectrum, so is a great person to cover this topic. And with that, let's dive in. I see a lot of questions already, which is awesome. So our first question was one submitted from Wonk Nation. Brian, wondering if you can talk about trends that you're seeing on Twitter or X, particularly around brand safety. Is that still a platform that's worth using as the conversation that platform has changed over the last year or so?
So it's a great question. Thanks so much for having me on. It's great to talk with everybody. As far as brand safety concerns, I mean, I think the obvious answer is, yeah, always. You should always have brand safety concerns when you're doing anything with social media, especially if you're doing advertising and such, and being concerned about what your content might be bumping up against. When it comes to X in particular, or any of the platforms, but I'll start with X. You know, I think there's certain really good uses for X. I think there's certain places where it really falls down when it comes to grassroots and really engaging folks. It is still a platform that's driven by celebrity and by influencers, some of whom are going over to TikTok, but still very much driven that way. But the nice thing about Twitter, I know we're not talking about media relations today, but it's still something very much used in the media world. But what's relevant for us in grassroots is it's also something still watched by lawmakers and used by lawmakers. And so, you know, I'm not a huge believer in the impact that tweeting, just sort of tweeting random things from your organization, is going to have, unless you are targeting and tagging particular lawmakers, particular influencers that you're trying to reach as it relates to your campaign. It's also a great volunteer engagement tool if you sort of have the right demographic of volunteer, getting them to use Twitter to amplify your message amongst their influencers, to amplify it and make sure it gets seen by certain lawmakers. We just did a digital summit last week, and I had a big nonprofit organization talking about how they were using social media, a little bit more Instagram than Twitter, but identifying their own volunteers who had a good number of followers, maybe not as big as a top celebrity, but what you often find is if for social media, if you might have a volunteer that's got 100, 200, 300 followers, but they have really high engagement with those folks. There are definitely some uses for Twitter, probably a little bit more with Instagram and Facebook, again, depending on your demographic. But don't toss it all out yet. You want to stick with it for a while.
I think that comment about tagging legislators is really, really pertinent. We've had some clients who talk about how if you send an email and it doesn't get, if you send an email to a legislator and it never gets replied to, nobody knows. If you tag a legislator on Twitter and they don't respond or answer your questions, everyone can see. And so it's almost a constituent management function to need to care about those mentions. Obviously, there's a lot of noise, but if you're asking kind of a respectful question, then there's some awareness across their constituents and voters if they are engaging those people.
Absolutely. And it gets seen, right? You see, if a volunteer sends a message to a lawmaker, it goes into the system. We all know how that system works. But there are definitely people on staff who are monitoring Twitter, monitoring their lawmaker getting tagged. And so my opinion is always that that's a much stronger engagement, actually tweeting at a lawmaker than sending them a message. But, as a result, you're going to get fewer volunteers who are willing to do it.
Awesome. Moving on to our next question. I'm wondering about successful staffing models you've seen or been a part of for organizations who are working in advocacy. Is there a model you would recommend related to how organizations staff or outsource advocacy?
So it's a great question, but it just needs a little bit more information. So the answer is yes. There's several different great models out there. And what Teresa mentioned in her intro me that the last part, because I don't want you to think that I'm doing other work on ACS Can Time. So 2 years ago, I actually left the American Cancer Society to start my own consulting group, Rubenstein Impact Group. So when I talk about I'm working with clients, I don't want you to think, wait, I thought he was working with ACS. So yeah, we actually just work with an organization to help them with a staffing model and sort of reimagine what that would look like. But what we learned from there, we learned from working with others, it really depends on how many staff you have and what you want to achieve. So the answer to your question is very different if you've got 3 advocacy staff versus 30 or 300 advocacy staff. It's also very different if you're trying to do only federal legislation versus federal and state or federal, state, and local. So there are definitely some models. Happy to talk with folks about that. It's more of an individual conversation based upon what your situation is and what your goals are.
Awesome. Our next question. And folks, keep them coming. If you've just joined, feel free to throw your questions in the Q&A. Here we go. Any suggestions on recruiting grassroots advocacy volunteers in parts of the state where we are not physically present? We have a tough time getting state and federal advocacy volunteers to in-district meetings in more rural California.
Yeah, I love that question because even though I've spent a lot of my career doing digital grassroots, I'm a big believer that really the online is all about driving the power of the offline. And so I think it's great that you're trying to recruit to do these in-district meetings. One thing to do, and I know that Quorum does as well, is taking a look at your data and saying, okay, where do I have volunteers who are taking a lot of actions? And trying to identify volunteers there who you say, you know what, maybe they're ready to take that next step. And in fact, with one organization we're working for, they did a big week of action. And what we did was people who took more than one action during that week of action, the closeout email we did was we said, hey, you know what? You were one of our superstars this week. Would you be interested in taking that next step and getting more involved, getting involved locally? And they had a lot of volunteers raise their hand. And so that's how they began to identify sort of that next level of volunteer. And those are the people to approach about doing some of these in-district meetings. The other thing that we always recommend is you want to make it seem very simple. So meeting with a member of Congress, meeting with a state legislator, if it's not something you've done before, it sounds very intimidating. I was just at the state capitol yesterday with an organization for their state lobby day, and they had a lot of first-time volunteers. And, that first meeting with the lawmaker is always a little clunky. They're a little nervous. But after they do it once, they realize, all right, these are just normal people. And so as you're talking about and pitching that opportunity to volunteers, make sure you're also making really clear how you're going to support them, how you're going to give them the training they need, how simple this can really be. And just as importantly, making clear to them that they don't have to be an expert on the issue to do a meeting. That the most valuable thing they need to do is just tell their story. And there's plenty of staff that can back them up, or even just one staff person that can back them up afterwards to deal with the issue stuff. So look at your data, find those people, give them opportunities to raise their hand, and then make it really easy for them to do.
I think that's great advice, really, that teaching of why it's important for them to take action. Next question coming up. Do you have any best practices to share in segmenting your audience or advocates by engagement level and helping people move to more engaged levels?
I love this question. And I'll tell you why I love it. For example, coming from the American Cancer Society for many years, which had, several issues that ran from tobacco to cancer research to access to healthcare. And what a lot of organizations, the mistake they make is they think, oh, this person volunteers for my organization. They're passionate about my organization. And what you will most likely find, at least we see it in most situations, if you look at the data, it's not your organization they love. It's your issue that you're working on is what they're truly passionate about. And so if you are an organization that has a wide range of issues, begin taking a look at that data and say, all right, how many volunteers are taking action on this? And how much crossover is there to the other action? And if there's a lot of crossover, then great. You're in a really great situation. But in a lot of organizations that have a diverse portfolio, you're going to find that they are segmented, that volunteer who cares about tobacco issues has no interest in research issues. And so what that means is it's now incumbent upon you as the marketer to begin doing that segmenting. And saying, all right, we're going to be running 3 campaigns because Congress is doing several different things, or the state legislature is doing several different things. Or maybe it's just one bill. Maybe it's just the big spending bill that Congress is debating. But there's a lot of different moving parts that come to that. And beginning to divide up and actually run multiple campaigns against your list. And by segmenting them based on the actions they've taken and the issues that they've taken action on before. The other piece I'll address is the engagement level. And again, really important to understand how interested are your volunteers. You're going to have some volunteers who are willing to do the big things, the big House floor vote, the big Senate floor vote. But as you look at the data, you're going to see maybe they're not engaging as much in between. And so it's, again, your responsibility to say, okay, I'm going to begin to split my list a little bit. There's a segment of my most active list that they're going to receive every email. But maybe some of the less active folks, instead of giving them more emails than they're showing they want, you're only going to hit them up on the really big actions, the really easy, low barrier actions. So absolutely love segmenting, love doing it the way you talked about. And all of the answers are in your data. And if you have not done an audit of your email performance data, if you didn't do one for 2023, now is the perfect time to go back and really look at that data to get answers to some of those questions to help build out your campaigns for this year.
Awesome. And thank you all. There's so many questions coming in. This is great. Thank you, Brian, for answering that. Yeah. The next one here, let me make sure I haven't missed any. Any tips on best strategies for mobilizing people to send letters to lawmakers for upvotes on this question here? So it seems like a core that folks still are looking for ways to optimize. So when it comes to best strategy, I'm assuming you're saying sending letters, you might actually mean handwritten letters. So I'll answer it handwritten letters and then just sort of the digital messages to lawmakers. When it comes to handwritten letters, which is obviously more difficult, it's also a generational thing. I remember when my kids were sort of teenagers, I actually had to teach them how to address an envelope because they didn't really know. So there is a generation out there that hasn't done a lot of mailing things. And so when it comes to handwritten letters, realizing, number one, there's a delay in a lawmaker getting it. So if you need something to get across quickly, a letter and envelope is not going to be your answer. It's got to go through the screening process, the state security screening process. It takes some time. And what we find is when it comes to those handwritten things, we see a lot of success doing that attached to some other event. So when you have people gathered or their attention captured, say, okay, let's all take 5 minutes right now and let's write this. Let's do a handwritten letter.
And you might even say, you know what, you write the letter and we'll send it for you. We'll put it in the envelope, we'll stamp it, we'll get it in the mail for you. So again, just reducing the barriers for those volunteers. And my last thing about the handwritten letters is just really making clear to them how valuable those things are. Because we know that they do have a handwritten letter has a great impact on a staff person, much more so than just an email going through their web form. When it comes to sending messages to lawmakers, like through the quorum system or otherwise, a few best strategies. One is always ask more than once. So we find oftentimes with a lot of clients that we'll send that first email asking people to send a message to a lawmaker. And then we will send the follow-up email to those who didn't, and we might get a 50 to 70% lift again. So almost as many as we did the first time. So you always want to ask more than once. 2 is make it sound really easy. I'm going to give away a little secret that we tested that really worked, and I've used it for many different organizations, is after you ask them to send that message to a lawmaker, put a line right after that says, it's easy to do using our simple action form, or some kind of line like that. It takes less than a minute to do using our easy action form. And I actually have a lot of folks bold that line. So again, make it seem really simple, because when you say send a message to a lawmaker, in your mind, you know, all they have to do is click once on your email and then click again. And especially if there's a cookie already, it's really simple for them to do. The form's auto-populated, but your volunteer might not know that. So you want to make it really clear to them how simple it's going to be. And again, talk about impact that sending messages are going to have. And really importantly, after they take the action, not as your autoresponder, but at some point in your campaign narrative, make sure you're going back to all those action takers and letting them know the impact that their action had. Let them know, let them see, oh, here was the benefit, even if you lose. And as a grassroots person, I am known for saying losses can be more effective than wins when it comes to grassroots. So don't be afraid to communicate back to folks just because you didn't get the vote outcome or didn't get the vote at all that you wanted. But make sure you're following up with those folks to let them know the outcome of the campaign, the outcome of that action. And so not only will that help them send more messages in the future, but you might also be able to use that to get them to take a sort of higher barrier action, a phone call, a tweet, or something else.
Awesome. That is really helpful to hear. And so our next question is a little bit different, kind of taking in a different direction. What's the best way to advocate on a global level when there aren't specific lawmakers to target? So I think like some public opinion advocacy or things like that.
Yeah, so I personally have not gone global, but I have worked on campaigns where you're trying to influence global officials, maybe they're at the UN or something similar, but not actually trying to change policy in the UK or something like that. And so when it comes to advocating beyond just lawmakers, there's a bit of smoke and mirrors here, to be honest, right? So for example, we did a campaign last year where we targeted the CEO of a major health insurer. And so we had volunteers send messages. We got their email address. I'm sure their assistant was loving this. And we had our volunteers sending messages to that CEO. And I will tell you, it did work. We also paired that with a rally in front of their headquarters. So we did several things to get their attention, but it did actually bring them to the table. It led to a meeting. It led to a very bad policy being suspended for about 6 to 9 months. And they haven't reinstated it yet, which has been a good thing for patients. And so it's similar to lawmakers in that you want it just to seem very relevant. Here's who we're targeting. Here's why, and here's the impact that we want to have.
Awesome. That is very helpful to hear, especially for a lot of folks, I think, that want to expand their issue and get it onto more folks' radars, that using some of those global organizations, even if it's not specific legislators, if they don't have an advocacy base there, is a great idea.
And I'll just sort of add that I mentioned that was sort of smoke and mirrors. The smoke part of that is, they got that organization, that company to the table. Did they get 5,000, 100,000 messages in? No, but they saw action and they saw a result. So that was part of a larger action of having a rally, doing some other things. but we paired it all together and got the result. And so the smoke part of that is they're associating sending those messages with a very positive pro-patient result.
This is a great question because we know that stories break through so much better than form messages. How do you get advocates comfortable and willing to share their personal stories with their lawmakers?
This is a great question. And I think I know Marissa. This is the Marissa that I'm thinking of. So I love that question. And we just talked about this last week, and I will do a shout out. Allison Shapiro from CARE was actually the one who shared some great examples of things they're doing to get advocates to share personal stories. I'll tell you, Alzheimer's Association also has done some really great work around it. Neither are my clients. This isn't me plugging my people. These are just organizations that are doing some really good things around personal story sharing. So one is actually not asking volunteers to share their story. Not using those actual words, because that seems a bit intimidating and overwhelming. Well, sharing my story, if I've been going through a year of treatment and I've been hassled, I've got 20 hours of phone calls, law with the insurance company trying to get things done, or hassling with medical providers. If you say share my story, I mean, that could be a narrative, a book, and that's too much for me to do. And so what people are finding really works well is say, just tell us 2 or 3 sentences about your experience, and we'll follow up with you to talk to you more about it. And so, okay, 2 or 3 sentences, that I can do. And what is really important, as I talk to a lot of organizations when it comes to truly collecting stories, is you've got to realize it's not going to be only a digital activity. You're going to need to have staff who are prepared to follow up with those volunteers to capture the full story. You're not, in almost all cases, you're not going to capture it through that initial story collection form that you have. And so lower that barrier by just saying, just tell us a little bit about, give us 2 or 3 sentences. Something that people have also seen that's been very effective is they will provide an example of what they mean by sharing your story. If you're trying to collect video stories, provide a video of what that looks like to give people an example. Again, trying to lower that barrier to them so it seems really easy. And again, make sure you're going to have people ready to follow up, because it takes time and effort to truly get those stories you're going to want for the lawmakers.
I love that idea of treating it like an icebreaker, of like just a little bit, get in the door. And then like once you get started, it's so much easier to continue that conversation.
Yeah, it's almost a lead gen effort.
Yeah.
Actually collecting that actual story.
So this question is great because we don't have a lot of content. I don't think we've covered this in a webinar before. How do you make a petition campaign successful? It seems like the public is very resistant to signing a pledge or petition related to legislation or a position.
Yes, I haven't seen too much resistance, maybe to the pledges, but to petitions, I haven't seen too much resistance from folks. But the key is make it really simple. Make it, I'd like to talk about issues as far as street level impact. So don't tell me all the science and reasons behind why copay accumulator should be eliminated from the law, because no one knows what a copay accumulator is. But make it about help us pass laws that are going to lower the cost of prescription drugs for patients. If you make it really about how it's going to impact the patient and not about legislative policy, that action is going to help. Controversy helps. If you have an enemy, that also helps if you're going against something. If people are trying to take something away, you'll always get higher action rates with the threat of something getting taken away versus trying to add something new. No one likes anything taken away. Whether they like it or not, they still don't want you to take it away. So look at that from that perspective as well, and keep it short. Don't make them, there was a trend with change.org that people got into these very, very long petitions. Keep your petitions short, keep it simple. Don't try to educate your volunteers all about your issue in the petition. Just educate them on the impact it's going to have and the benefit it's going to have for your audience. And I think you'll have success.
This next question, I think, is the ultimate question that we all want the exact numbers to know. What is a good frequency for email or phone calls? At what point do they start being ignored?
So it's a great question, and I get it all the time. And the question is, it's different for every organization. But again, like I said before, the answer lies in your data. So I mentioned earlier about making sure you're doing an email performance audit. If you haven't done that, what you should definitely do starting today is make sure you have a tracking chart. And I've got an email tracking chart template I can share with folks. I can share with Teresa if she wants to hand out as a follow-up. But track your email performance. Every email, it takes literally 3 minutes to track the results of an email in a spreadsheet. Even if you hate Excel spreadsheets, I promise it's really easy to do. And what you're going to do is you're going to watch your data. And if you start seeing your performance drop off, that means you crossed the line. You went too far, and don't freak out, but just dial it back a little bit. Unfortunately, the only way to know you went too far is to cross the line and then come back. But what I can tell you, because we get this especially in smaller organizations, you have leadership, you'll have comms and other folks who are always like, oh, you're emailing too much, you're emailing too much. In just about every instance, you're not emailing too much. What I'm a big believer is the first rule of your emails is they need to be relevant to your volunteers, not relevant to the organization. Of course, it's relevant to your organization. If your content is relevant to your volunteers, you can email them a ton about it. If you're sending content that they don't care about, then one email is too much. And so just think about your own inbox. If there's an organization you belong to or a club you're a part of, so I play a lot of tennis. And so if I'm getting emails about tennis things going on around the city, I love that. It's relevant to me. You can send me an email a day about that and I'll open it. But I don't play polo. And if you send me 1 or 2 emails about playing polo, I'm unsubscribing. That doesn't interest me. It's not relevant to me at all. So if you're staying relevant, I would say don't be too concerned about over emailing, but keep it on your performance data to confirm how you're doing.
Yeah, I think this question really goes hand in hand with that engagement and segmentation question we answered earlier of like, if like you do segmentation hand in hand with your email strategy, then the frequency that you can send goes up quite a bit. Here we go. What would you, similar question, what would you say is the most important feature or practice to include in an email campaign to drive engagement? So what's the one thing every time you're preparing an email you're absolutely going to include?
All right, well, the obvious answer is the action with a link. So we'll pass on that. The most important thing I believe is the street level impact of your issue. So you don't need to educate them on the policy. Your lobbyist doesn't need to feel like, oh, no, I got to include the bill. I'm a very anti-bill number person. I never believe including a bill number in an email. So that's a different story for a different day. But that street level impact, how is this policy going to improve the life of your constituency? And not that it's going to change Medicare rules and change what CMS does or change what the EPA does. Your volunteers, your constituents don't care about the nitty gritty, unless you have like a scientific organization or something else. But for a constituent volunteer type organization, they care about how it's going to impact them personally. It's going to lower the cost of drugs. It's going to increase access to healthcare. It's going to help children or help new parents get the services they need for their children. Get really down to that street level, how it's going to impact the individual. And that's how you're going to drive the greatest engagement. And there's others too, but you said I could only pick one. Oh, Teresa, you got muted.
Perfect. You'd think I'd be used to this by now, a couple of years into remote work, but please keep sending your questions in. I think for now we will get through all these, so keep sending them in, but they have been great. Our next one, tips or tactics to increase engagement across multiple campaigns that are active at the same time. Legislation moves at its own pace. You don't always get to choose to spread out key bills or things like that.
Yeah, so we see this a lot, especially at the state level, where it's truly all the chaos seems to hit at once. And once in a while at the federal level too. So for one, if your list is big enough, the segmenting we talked about earlier, make sure that your volunteers truly care about the issue that you're focused on or the issues that you're focused on. And if you are able to, if your data does show they're a bit siloed, then respect that and run parallel campaigns to different segments of your list. But if you don't have the opportunity, if your list isn't big enough to support something like that, or you don't quite have enough data to justify that, what you want to do is you want to not live email to email. And this is really true in any situation. You don't want to live day to day when it comes to engaging your volunteers. You really want to build out a campaign narrative or a communication narrative across several months. And so you can actually begin to think about, all right, we're going to talk about this. How am I going to transition the volunteer from issue A to issue B? And so a way to do that is you just acknowledge it right up front. Let's say you've been pushing one issue and you need to switch. And that next email said, I know we've been talking about this, but this issue, this opportunity just arose, and I'd love for you to do this too, because it also helps save lives, save money, save the environment, whatever it might be. So being very deliberate about transitioning volunteers from one issue to the other, if you have that opportunity. But the most important thing is just don't live day to day, because that's how you lose people, because they feel like you're all over the place as an organization. So make sure you're building out that campaign narrative, you're creating that story arc, and when you do that, you'll have more success weaving those issues in and out with one another. And I realize things come up that are unexpected, and that's okay. These narratives all need to be highly flexible, because that's the fun of doing advocacy. That's why our work is more fun than just sort of doing fundraising events, is because we never know what might come the next day. So you'll build that into your narrative, but it really helps to have that built out.
Awesome. Our next question is pretty opposite. So instead of having multiple issues at the same time, Matt talks about when it's tough to get bills to come to a vote, how can we determine potential champions beyond positive mentions? So I think this is referring to how to find those legislators who might support the issues that you're trying to advocate for when there's not tons of data past legislative history.
Yeah, so I'll sort of adjust. So I think are sort of two pieces to this. When it's tough to get bills to come up for a vote. So I'm a big believer in creating campaigns that are not directly tied or exclusively tied to legislative process. Because if you're waiting for Congress to have a committee vote or a markup or a hearing or a floor vote, if you're going to be waiting a long time for a lot of your issues. And so sometimes you've got to manufacture activities, manufacture moments in time is what I call them, throughout a campaign. So you know what? We need to recruit 20, we need to get 25 co-sponsors on this bill by this date, 50 co-sponsors by that date. So sometimes you've got to manufacture your own deadline, sort of your own urgency around things. And so that's how you'll be able to fill up a campaign calendar, because look, it could be 2 years until your bill actually gets a vote. So especially at the federal level. When it comes to champions, this is really where I talked earlier about the offline and where your online supports your offline. Doing those district meetings, doing those recess visits, doing some of those letters to the editor or op-eds to really bring the issue's attention to a lawmaker, and also bringing a volunteer's name, their attention to the lawmaker. Introduce that volunteer to the lawmaker, either through an in-district visit or if they're in DC, but don't just do it once. So the key is to find some volunteers. And again, look at your data to identify some of those folks. We talked earlier about in-district visits. Identify some volunteers who are willing to have multiple meetings per year. Maybe they come to your lobby day in DC and do a visit and say, look, you know what? We're also going to help you do 2 in-district visits during recess. We're going to give you a little toolkit that you can use, so it's manageable, especially for a small staff. And just start having your volunteers build those relationships. And, everyone's trying to build those relationships with the chair and the ranking members of the committee and sort of the most influential people. And that can be really tough to do, especially if you don't have volunteers in those districts. But you know what? Today's backbencher is tomorrow's key influencer. Today's city council member is tomorrow's state lawmaker, is next week's member of Congress. So don't feel you have to restrict yourself to just the people in power who have all the power right now. Look below that a little bit. Start investing there. And over time, you just might have the perfect volunteer in the perfect district to get your bill moving.
Yeah, we talk a lot about this at Quorum. Quorum offers local, state, and federal engagement tools. And so what's nice is when you are logging meetings with a state official or the city councilor, like you mentioned, and they move up into those positions of power, all your institutional knowledge is saved with everything in one platform. Our next question we touched on a little bit earlier, but I think is a good one. So we'll touch on the nuance a little bit here. Suggestions for finding advocates in district where your organization needs support but currently doesn't have any. I think this is really relevant at the state level when issues can pop up for the first time where maybe you haven't worked a lot in that state before.
Yeah, so there's several ways to do this. It just depends on your resource capacity in your organization. So one is, if you are the advocacy part of a larger organization that maybe does community type events, is start tapping into those folks. Say, how can we get advocacy mentioned or part of the walk? And I love using texting and now QR codes for that type of thing to gain some penetration with walks or community events. If you have chapters, create chapter content. Chapters send out a lot of newsletters. Try to, package some content that can easily just drop right into a newsletter without them having to do any work. Try to get part of a local board meeting. If you have any volunteers there, meet with them, have a one-on-one meeting, ask them where they think they could go to get more volunteers. If you truly just have nobody there, look for a coalition you can join as an organization. Maybe, and I'm not suggesting you're going to steal their, or you should not steal their volunteers, but get involved in a coalition that might open some doors to you for speaking opportunities at a local level, or attending events at a local level. You can also, if you've got somebody nearby, maybe that doesn't live in that district that you need, go to the parade, go to the 4th of July parade, go to the St. Patrick's Day parade, get someone out there with a tablet, or even with a stack of paper petitions if you want to, and really do that sort of hard legwork like folks used to do to build up their list in a local jurisdiction. And of course, there's always advertising. There's the Care2, Change.org, and not Change.org anymore, but there's plenty, there's Facebook ads, there's other paid ways to do it. Which, look, just remember, if you're going to do any paid acquisition, you need to make sure you have an entire engagement plan built around that before you launch that first ad. I got called into an organization recently. They spent a lot of money bringing in like 15,000 volunteers, acquiring 15,000 volunteers, and they did nothing with them for a year. No communication. They said, okay, Brian, we want you to come in and re-engage these folks. I said, it's too late. They're gone. But they were doing another ad campaign. I said, well, look, let's focus on the new people you're bringing in. Let's make sure we don't lose those folks. So a lot of different ways, but there's no easy way. They all take some work.
Great. So as we come about, we got about 20 minutes left. I am thinking we're not going to get through all of our questions. So I'm going to plug for folks to use that thumbs up for functionality to tell us which questions that you are most interested in hearing about in our next 20 minutes. So please go vote for those. We'll put democracy in action for our webinar today. So to get started, a question that I saw with 6 thumbs up, let me scroll through here and find it, is one that I think is the golden ticket of this year. How are you pumping up advocates with fresh energy when Congress is so deadlocked?
Controversy. And I don't mean partisan controversy, because most of the folks I work with don't want to be partisan, but there's controversy, there's intrigue. And for the moment, you're building up to some really big dates with March 1st and March 8th on the calendar right now. And so let them know this is the moment, especially because as you talk to folks, there's really going to only be probably 2 moments this year, right? There's going to be whatever they got to do to get these spending bills passed. And then there's going to be the lame duck. And there'll be some small stuff in between, but these are the moments. So make it seem like this is do or die. We've got to get this done now. Use that urgency, use the controversy, something that I love to do. If, let's say, the House passes a bill that has your piece in it and the Senate version does not, let your volunteer, I'm sure you celebrated the House passing your bill that's got that, or the bill that's got your provision in it. Send that next email that says, oh my God, the Senate is pulling our piece out. Quick, email your senators now because we're going to lose what we just gained in the House, what you just worked so hard for, and now in threat of being lost. So play the House and Senate off of each other a little bit. The great thing also is that these votes are in the news right now. If people pay attention to politics at all, they know there's stuff going on right now. Maybe they don't know your issue is going on, but you can tie your issue to this larger big vote coming up because people have a sense there's something happening. So use that attention, use some controversy, use some urgency, and again, just make it incredibly relevant to your volunteers to get them activated. And if you want to go partisan, that's a whole different world, but we'll talk about nonpartisan for now.
All right, a question with 9 upvotes.
Ooh.
Wait, tell me why you don't include bill numbers. What other info is erroneous, or what should I absolutely include?
Oh my God, I hope some of my former colleagues aren't on this because they know I've got a whole soapbox around bill numbers. So I will do the very short version. If I tell you, Teresa, help us get this bill passed because it saves lives, right? That makes sense. If I tell you, Teresa, help us pass bill HB 726 because it helps save lives. Well, what did HB 726 contribute to motivating you to take action? All it did was clutter things up for folks. It's meaningless policy legislative jargon that does nothing to motivate your volunteers. And at the end of the day, they don't know what HB 726 is. And if you put HB 726 in this email and the next email you put HB 924, I bet it's not going to make any difference at all because they don't remember the other one was 726. So bill numbers, when you are messaging to your volunteers, they just have absolutely no value. Now, there are a few exceptions to that strong statement. If you get like an HB1 and, not by itself, and all of the media is reporting about your issue as HB1, whereas you've got this whole world out there talking about HB1. That's how the media is talking about it, how influencers are talking about it. Okay, then that works. The other time it's okay is if you're doing a referendum where, vote yes on 6, that type of thing. But when it comes to legislative campaigns, the bill number provides no benefit whatsoever. Now, in the message the volunteers send to lawmakers, go bill number crazy. Bill number, jargon, all that stuff. But I've yet to meet a volunteer who says, I don't really care about helping patients, but 726, I love that.
Awesome. Know your audience and communicate to them differently. It's like the theme of the week for us here at Quorum as we launch some new features that help that personalization to different groups. So our next question, 8 upvotes. Is there a noticeable difference in the effectiveness between emails and phone calls or a pre-written email and personalized email on advocacy outcomes?
So let's talk about effectiveness in 2 different ways. So when it comes to impacting lawmakers, a phone call is worth more than an email. So if you've ever heard, credit to Bradford Fitch, a Congressional Management Foundation who presents all over the place about this, in a congressional office, in a state lawmaker office, a phone call is worth more. They track the phone calls. They do counts of that. They do counts of the emails too, but the phone calls are more personalized. So definitely on that. When it comes to pre-written versus personalized, again, personalized is more effective for a legislator than them seeing the same email 100 times or 1,000 times. So trying to get your volunteers to personalize the email they send is always a positive thing to do. But look, we all know the fact is 90+% of them aren't going to do that. They're just going to send, click on send to send that message. And that's okay. That serves a role too. Getting a volume into a lawmaker's office serves a role. Again, it brings attention to your issue. But some of the great things, all right, Teresa, I'm going to go out on a limb here because I think I saw that your new system now does this. But with AI and some of the things that Quorum and some other tools are doing, you can now actually write many versions of that email to lawmaker, or their system will write many versions of that email to the lawmaker so that the lawmaker is getting different versions of what is essentially the same email. No, it's great. At the end of the day, the members of Congress's offices, they're going to catch on to this and sort of figure this thing out too. And they're going to figure out how to assess for this. But for right now, while it's still brand new, definitely use those types of AI generated features that customize those emails.
Yeah, I'll jump in and just give a little more detail. So like Brian said, we recently introduced at Quorum a piece of functionality where you can write one version of your advocacy email and the AI generator can create 300 different iterations of that text so that it does appear different to those legislators. The other functionality that I think meets nicely in the middle is we've added the ability to create different legislator segments. So you can create one version of your message that goes to the Democratic co-sponsors, one that goes to the Republican co-sponsors, one that goes to Democrats that sit on the key committee, one that goes to Republicans that sit on the key committee, and change the messaging to align to how those different groups will receive the bill or engage in the bill, what interests them about it, what they might be more willing to support. And so while that legislator is receiving all the same email, it's more targeted to what they care about as opposed to a generic one sent to all 435 members. So we've got two different things there that help meet in the middle a little bit on that personalization.
And those are great tools, especially from a grassroots perspective that, it generates all those different 300 different versions of that message to the lawmaker. And we can have a whole separate conversation with AI. Maybe there will be some questions that come up, but use these new tools. Take advantage of them, especially while they're still fresh.
All right, our next 8 upvote question. What are the top metrics that you show leadership in your organization about the importance of grassroots advocacy efforts? Do you focus more on the policy impacts or member engagement? This is an awesome question. I'm excited to hear the answer.
Yeah, so the easy answer is the metrics I use are the ones that look the biggest and the most impressive. And then I figure out, all right, how am I going to, why is this relevant? So start there. Start with your best metrics. The metrics that leadership should care about, and maybe you want to train your leadership to care about, are a few things. From a digital perspective, it's actions. What actions? How many actions are you generating? Is one metric. But then also, what impact are you having on lawmakers? The thing about advocacy, as we all know, is sometimes you don't need 100 change. You don't need to change the mind of 100 lawmakers. You just need to change the mind of 3 lawmakers to get something done. Because everything else, everybody else will follow in line, or you'll get it out of committee, which maybe is the hardest part. And so, when it comes to your metrics, people love to say, "Oh, I've got a list with 500,000 people on it, or 300,000 people on it," and the word, it always made me a little crazy when sort of member of the leadership would say, "Oh yeah, we've got 1 million volunteers," and I'm like, "Well, yeah, but we only had 45,000 take action in the last 60 days. So let's talk about what our real list is, as opposed to sort of the marketable list." And so actions are really big. And then, how you're impacting lawmakers is really big. And also think about what you're trying to achieve as your organization. And hopefully you're starting your year, or however you measure your year, with some very measurable goals. And so you're saying, we want to attract 25 new volunteers in these districts who will do an in-district meeting. And while 25 might not sound like a huge number, if you're doing all of those in Georgia and you're getting the appropriations and the rules committee members and you're building those relationships, that's a huge impact that you're having. So from a grassroots perspective, I don't focus as much on the policy. And I don't like to focus as much on the policy because there's so many things that go into that. We could run a brilliant, highly impactful campaign, but still not get the vote we want. And so don't let policy movement, I think, be the judge of your grassroots. It's a factor, but don't let that be the ultimate judge, because there's a lot of really important things we do from a grassroots perspective that, number one, are also longer term than shorter term. So really base it on your plan, but not necessarily just on a policy impact. I love the engagement piece. And there's a lot of different ways to measure engagement depending on what your goals are.
And I'm going to give one quick plug for Quorum here. Quorum offers dashboard functionality that you can set up these reports and it will auto update as folks engage with your campaigns. So number of actions over time, number of unique advocates taking action. There's all kinds of different metrics that you can pull there, set it up at the beginning of the year based on your goals and let it run, and share it as an external link with your executive team so that they can look directly at the same sources you're looking at there. Now, with our last 10 minutes, I think we probably have time for maybe 2 questions. So the one that has 7 upvotes right now, what are some of the most successful kinds of educational pieces that you've seen in campaigns in reaching and engaging lawmakers? We've used one-pagers, but what about other types of resources?
So for engaging lawmakers and engaging volunteers are 2 totally different things, completely different. So I'm not the lobbyist. So as far as I'm going to leave the engaging lawmakers piece to the lobbyists on the call. But when it comes to engaging volunteers to communicate with your lawmakers, I don't love using the word education, because at the end of the day, I only need my volunteers to know just enough to motivate them to take action. I don't need them to know all the intricacies of a bill, or even all the things that a bill does. I just want them to know about the thing that they care about most, that's going to impact them the most that that bill does, and give them just enough to drive them to take the action that I want. Now, with some of your offline volunteers, your people who might be doing in-district visits, those types of things, those folks need some education. They need to be able to answer a few questions. Don't need to be experts. They need to be able to answer a few questions, a few FAQs. But when it comes to your mass grassroots communication, don't look at it as education. Look at it as motivation. What do I need to tell you to motivate you to act? And in most situations, it's not that much information. Personally, I'll see some organizations that say, take this action, and to learn more, you can go look at this fact sheet also. And I think that's a very bad idea, actually, because what happens is they click on that fact sheet and they get lost in there and they never come back to take your action. And so your email should really only have one link, and that link should drive them to the action you want them to take. So think more about motivators than educators.
Last question of the day. How do you spotlight or leverage your successes? So I think since we talked just about how to share them with your leadership, and this continued to get some upvotes after that, I'm guessing this is asking a little bit about sharing your wins with your advocates to keep the momentum going.
Absolutely. And let's not keep it to wins, because leveraging your losses is as equally important or even more important than leveraging your successes, because they're actually even more motivating to a volunteer than a win might be. But to answer your question is, just do it everywhere, right? Clearly on social media, if you don't have an advocacy specific social media presence, which is okay, and actually sometimes that's even better, work with your marketing communications team to get on their calendar. If a bill passes today and it's not on social media for a week and a half, that's okay. Most of your volunteers aren't going to realize when that vote took place. It's okay for it to happen a little bit later. Make sure board members are aware of it. Make sure it gets brought up in board meetings to help you build up some internal leverage. Again, those chapter newsletters, give some content to your chapters. If they've got newsletters, they have their own social media content. Create a post for them, create the image, create the content, give it to them all fully packaged. Email your volunteers about it, maybe even more than once. And when you do email, make sure you ask them to do something else. Maybe it's, hey, we won. Can you donate to help with more successes? Or do you want to raise your hand to volunteer to do more on our next campaign? Text. Hopefully many of you are using SMS as part of your campaigns. Absolutely. Be texting your volunteers. The stat that someone gave me last week was that 90% of text messages are open in the first 3 minutes. So absolutely make sure you're texting about it. A little trick there is something we've had a lot of success doing if you're trying to build up your SMS list. On the thank you page after someone takes an action, say, want to be the first to find out the outcome of this vote? Join our text message program. It's a great way to build up your text list. In your annual report, if your organization does one of those, make sure it's on the website. Make sure it's on the advocacy section of your website. Make sure it's on any page to talk about this campaign, talk about the success that you had last year, to help get them excited for this. So anywhere and everywhere.
Awesome. I think that's a great way to end our conversation today, talking about the what's next after an awesome campaign. Because now I think with all of this new information, folks have all the tools to run those campaigns that do have those successes and initiatives worth spotlighting. So Brian, I don't know the exact count of questions we got through, but I think it was at least 15 or so. So thank you for your time and for everyone for contributing them. If your question did not get answered today, I want to plug again Quorum's community for customers, Wonk Nation. If you are a current Quorum user, you are welcome to join our Slack community where you can communicate with peers, both about product strategy and broader industry best practices. We're going to take these questions that we didn't get to and pose them to the group. So if your question didn't get answered and you are a Quorum user, join that community to get some feedback from your peers who are already in there and learning from that group. We are going to have another AMA in early March. We are just finalizing our speaker there. If there are folks you'd like to hear from, folks who are on the line who would like to be our expert, shoot me an email at teresa@quorum.us. And like we've talked about a little bit, Quorum has a lot of new exciting grassroots features that went live this week. If you would like to see some of those, please visit quorum.us. And Brian, I think you deserve a glass of water and hopefully a break before your next meeting.
Well, this was great. I can do this for another hour. This is a lot of fun. Thanks for all the great questions.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you again for being our guinea pig, and we will see you all back in March.